Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be here speaking on Bill S-5. Although I have some major concerns about it, I think it's an important step that we're taking, and I look forward to seeing the next steps that are completed. Madam Speaker, in my area of the world, I live in a rainforest. And one thing that we're very sure of is things in our area are usually wet, even when it's very, very hot. But we have now lived through several months of having hardly any rain. So we are now in a situation in my area where we're in a drought, where we can't do any kind of burning because the risk of forest fire is too big. And that is because there is a change in the environment that's having such a meaningful impact that all of us as Canadians should be very, very concerned about. I know the people in my riding are very concerned. I remember one day it rained here in Ottawa, and because I am from a rainforest, I really enjoy rain. I was happy to see it. And I had so many constituents reach out to me and say, if you could bring the rain home with you, Rachel, we would really appreciate it. And I think that it's something we could laugh about, but it's also something that my area is very concerned about. So as we move forward on any bill that says that we need to recognize the right of a healthy environment, I'm all in. I want to be part of that, and I think we need to do better. We know that across this planet, over 150 countries have made this commitment. They have legal obligations that they are accountable for, and Canada still hasn't taken that step. So we need to see that action, because I think a lot of Canadians are watching what's happening, and they want to see action that means something. And quite honestly, we keep seeing something in this place that is not taking the next step. So we're going to be talking today, and I will be talking about the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Just for those of my constituents, I'm going to keep calling it CEPA. And you know, this bill does amend CEPA to recognize the right to a healthy environment, to confirm the government's commitment to implementing under the Act, and strengthening the chemicals management plan, including the need to take into consideration vulnerable population and cumulative events. It has been more than 20 years since this has been done, and modernization in this day and age could not be more important, could not be more of a priority. Madam Speaker, this few years in my riding, we've had some challenging times. I talked about one earlier, but I also want to talk about the fact that not too long ago, we saw the Zim Kingston in our area, and there was a significant container spill of about 109 containers. Of those containers, about 4 of them washed up on shore in my riding. And Madam Speaker, just in case people don't understand, my riding is very remote. A lot of those beautiful beaches along the coastline are hard to get to, and people don't see them often. So when you start receiving images from constituents with a beach full of plastic toys, a beach full of refrigerators, you feel very concerned about this. So when we look at this, we know that contamination not only is having an impact on our bodies as people, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's also having a significant impact on the oceans around my area. In the last few months in the late spring, I was over in Savory Island, another community, one of many in my riding, and we were picking up waste. It was huge. The community came out and they were cleaning up the beaches, pulling things out of the ocean, and I had an opportunity to talk to Catherine and Paul, and we had chats about nurdles. And for those of you who don't know, those nurdles are those tiny little pieces of styrofoam. And I'm going to use that word because most people are familiar with it. And they get everywhere. And if you're trying to clean them up off the beach, and if you've ever had that experience, you realize how hard it is. But what's even more concerning, of course, is it continues to really contaminate the ocean atmosphere for fish, for wildlife, and that really concerns me. I think of the work that they have done on having petitions sent into the House that I've been happy to read for this place to really talk about how we're going to start to address that and make sure that there isn't that waste in the marine environment that is really in some of the industries that are out in the water. I thank Angela from Fishing for Plastic, who's also been a big part of that. And, you know, I think one of the things that concerns me about this bill, and we've seen it in the Senate. We saw a letter that went to the Senate from some of Canada's biggest polluters, and they are trying to block amendments. They are trying to say, don't go that far. Madam Speaker, at some point we have to decide, you know, are we going to continue to hope and wait, hope and see that some sort of miracle will happen and we won't be in this environmental crisis that we are in right now, or are we going to actually take action? So I know there's a lot of push. There's a lot of industries telling us that we can't take that next step, but I think it's absolutely important that we do. So we know that CEPA is Canada's main law to regulate toxic substances. We know that we're seeing more and more indicators that there's toxic substances in a lot of things, and there's not a lot of accountability about what that is. So that means in our communities we're using things that may have harm, and we just don't know about it. So those are some of the things we need to address. We know that the Senate did make some positive amendments. I really appreciated them removing some of the troubling language around the right to a healthy environment, and it should be balanced with relevant factors. Again, it seems like a simple choice for me, and I know that not all my friends in this place agree, but at some point it's either we're going to choose a healthy environment and put investment and support into moving in that direction, or we're going to continue down the same path that we are on, and that is not a safe path. There are some things that I'm very concerned about in this bill, some troubling weaknesses and loopholes that we would like to see amended. So I talked earlier about the strengthening the right to healthy environment and not seeing that limiting factors, and making sure that how that right is applied is really important. But we also need to see some work done around ensuring that toxic substances assessments are kept up to date as scientific understanding of risks evolves and increases exposure. And why I think this is so important is, you know, businesses are really good at knowing the rules, and I appreciate that. That is their job, to know the rules. But when you know the rules really well, you often find ways to move around them. So we need to make sure that as we move forward with CEPA, that we're actually making sure that there's assessments that are happening rigorously through time so that we can always keep up to date with that scientific understanding so that we're mitigating those risks. And I think everybody in this country understands how important that is. We also need to improve public accountability and require clear guidelines and timelines for the management of toxic substances. This is just about accountability. And I think, you know, when I talk to everyday Canadians, and there's a lot that, you know, I've talked to in my writing some people who are very environmentally aware. They have very specific notions of where they want to go. But I also talk to people who just want it to get better and they don't know what to do with that information. And one of the things I hear from them is that they don't feel like the systems are clear enough for them to be able to understand it as an everyday Canadian. They're busy. They have a lot of things happening. So I think it is important that we do have that public accountability. And not only is it public, it's accessible. You know, I will talk about this forever. I've served a lot of people with different challenges, whether it be in their ability to speak a language because they've come from another country, if they've had a lack of education, if they have a developmental issue. And accountability and accessible information has always been one of the biggest challenges. So I hope to see that as well. I also think it's important that there is mandatory labeling of hazardous substance in consumer products. We're still seeing a lack of formal understanding here. So this is something that is not in the bill that I think needs to be amended. We need to make sure that we are just transparent for those people. And of course, I know I only have about a minute left. We need to address pollution hotspots in this country. And we have to acknowledge as a country that they are often in Indigenous, racialized, and low-income communities. This is something that all of us should take into serious account. And this bill at this point does not deal with this in a way that I think is as powerful, as meaningful as it could be. We need to address this issue. We need to take accountability that environmental distress and Indigenous justice, racialized justice, and low-income justice, those are totally intersectional. They are a place that we need to take accountability and start addressing this in a more meaningful way. So, Madam Speaker, as I said, I am going to support this to go to committee. I certainly hope to see all parties work together to get some of this important work into it, because it needs to be accessible, and everyday Canadians need to understand the rules so that they can hold to account the corporations who will be working in them. Thank you.